You ever have one of those days where you're underpaid, overtired, and someone just says the wrong thing at the wrong time? Elena Rossi did. Too bad the man she snapped at was Marco DeLuca, the most feared mafia boss in Milan. But that evening at La Serena, a quiet restaurant tucked into the heart of Milan's financial district, Elena Rossi did both in one breath. She wasn't trying to make a point. She wasn't trying to be brave. She was just exhausted, overworked, and furious. When Marco DeLuca, Northern Italy's most feared criminal figure, called her a waste of space in front of his entire entourage, something inside her snapped. Elena looked up, chin high, gaze steady. And in flawless Neapolitan, she called him an arrogant bastard. Loudly. Everyone in the room went still. Cutlery froze midair. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the jazz saxophonist in the corner trailed off mid-note. The manager dropped a tray. One of the bodyguards twitched toward his gun. Elena didn't flinch. What Marco DeLuca did next? Well, let's just say it wasn't what anyone expected. Hey storytellers, welcome back to the channel. If you've ever wanted to know what happens when a broke waitress challenges a mafia king in his own den and lives to tell the tale, this one's for you. Make sure to hit subscribe because what unfolds in Elena's story will leave your jaw on the floor. Now let's go back to the clinking plates, the heat off the espresso machine, and the moment everything changed. The plates clattered. The espresso steamed. The July air outside pressed through the kitchen vents like a wet hand on the back of her neck. Elena's feet ached in cheap shoes, her apron stained with the ghost of marinara from a double shift that had started 10 hours earlier. Her notebook was half full, tucked in her apron pocket, half novel draft, half order list. Her boss was barking at the kitchen. Table 7 was hers. And that's when he walked in. Marco DeLuca didn't enter restaurants. He seized them. Slick hair, tattoos crawling up his forearms like secrets too dangerous to say aloud. Black slacks, white polo, dark eyes that didn't blink. 2 bodyguards followed him, silent, lethal. Every conversation in the dining room died. Forks paused midair. Waitstaff vanished into kitchens like ghosts. Except Elena. She pulled the short straw. Elena expected the fallout to hit before sunrise. She barely slept, waiting for a black car to pull up outside her apartment, for men in suits to drag her away, for a punishment that would come swift and untraceable. But morning came like any other, indifferent and loud. The garbage truck rattled down via Mazzini, the old woman upstairs started her morning opera, and her phone buzzed with a reminder to clock in at the cafe by 8 a.m. Maybe, she thought, the insult had been swallowed by the noise of the city, or maybe she was already living on borrowed time. She tied her apron at Café Nos with shaking fingers, silently rehearsing a dozen excuses in case anyone, showed up asking for her. Marco DeLuca wasn't the kind of man who left things unresolved, and if silence was his move, it was probably the most terrifying one of all. The espresso machine hissed behind her, clinking ceramic and the sweet bitter scent of roasted beans filling the air. A customer asked for a double macchiato, and she smiled by instinct. But her mind wasn't behind the counter, it was at table 7, replaying every heartbeat of the night before. The bell above the cafe door chimed at precisely 9:17 a.m., and everything around her seemed to exhale. He walked in like he owned the block, no entourage this time, just him in a slate coat, sunglasses, and the kind of calm that only people with unlimited power could afford. Marco DeLuca removed his glasses slowly, like he had all the time in the world. Elena froze mid-pour. The mug overflowed. She cleaned the spill automatically, too aware of the way the other customers faded into background noise. Marco took a seat in the back, near the window, and gave her the kind of look that demanded presence, not permission. Her manager didn't notice him, or maybe he did and decided today wasn't the day to be brave. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward him with the same steps she'd used to serve him last night, only this time, she wasn't just afraid. She was furious that he'd come here, to her second job, like this was all some joke. "If you're here to get me fired, just say it and go," she said, her voice low and steady. Marco tilted his head, amused, like a lion curious about the barking of a very small dog. "Relax, Signorina. I'm not here to make you disappear, he replied. In fact, I'm here with an offer. One I think you'd be stupid to turn down. She didn't sit, didn't smile. I don't want anything from you. Marco shrugged. That's unfortunate. I was hoping to pay you. That made her pause just for a second, but he caught it, like he caught everything. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table, a check with her full name already written at the top. 5,000 euros. That's just for listening. Elena looked at the number, then at him. What do you want? She asked. His smile thinned. A story. My story. Written by someone who isn't afraid of me. That got her attention. She sat barely. You want a biography? She asked, suspicion prickling her spine. No, he said. A memoir. Ghostwritten. Raw, honest. Everything the world thinks it knows about me, undone by truth. Or at least, my version of it. Elena stared at him. You're a criminal. Why would you want your secrets on paper? His fingers drummed lightly on the table. Because secrets rot when they're buried. And I've buried more than most. A beat. Then softer. I don't want a priest. I want a writer. She laughed once, sharp. I'm not a writer. You used to be, he said, and she blinked. Journalism major at Sapienza. Dropped out junior year. Your professor, Kalina Mastriani, called you the sharpest pen she ever read. You worked on a novel 2 years ago, 37 pages, then stopped. I've read it. Her mouth went dry. How I look into people who make bold moves in public, he said, shrugging. It's good risk management. Her chair scraped back. So this was never about the insult. Marco stood too. That was the spark. But this is the fire. He leaned forward, voice velvet and smoke. You called me out. You weren't wrong. And now, I want you to help me tell the parts of me that no one else gets to see. It was insane. Dangerous. Tempting. Her rent was overdue, her bank account weeping, and her mother's care plan had just been reduced again. 5,000 for a conversation. More, probably, if she agreed. But that wasn't what pulled her in. It was the idea that she could hold a mirror up to a monster and maybe, just maybe, find a man staring back. 3 months, she said finally. No more. Marco's expression flickered approval, maybe even something like respect. 3 months, he repeated. That's all I'm giving you, she added. No guarantees, no promises. He leaned close, the table between them suddenly feeling too narrow. 3 months is more than I deserve, he whispered. And then he left, just like that. She didn't breathe until the door chimed shut behind him. For a full minute, she sat alone with the check, the silence, and the growing certainty that her life had just fractured into a before and after. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from the slow, horrible realization that she wasn't going to walk away from this. That some part of her was already hooked. Not by the money, by the story. Later that night, she found the courage to pull open the box of memories she'd buried in her closet. Her unfinished manuscript. Her mother's old photos. Her student ID from Sapienza, still with a hopeful smile she didn't recognize anymore. She ran a hand over the pages, yellowed and forgotten. Elena Rossi, investigative journalist, she'd once written in looping, determined print. Her mother's condition had changed everything. Diagnosis at 52. Progression faster than doctors expected. Elena had dropped out to care for her, worked 3 jobs to afford the basics, and stopped dreaming around the same time she started surviving. The world didn't pay for ambition. It paid for labor. And Elena had become an expert at endurance. But now, the past knocked again. In the form of a dangerous man with secrets to spill and eyes that didn't blink when they stared straight into you. She didn't trust him. She probably never would. But curiosity, like hunger, had its own kind of power. 3 months. She told herself it was just a job. Just words. Just questions. But deep down, Elena already knew nothing about Marco DeLuca was ever just anything. And the deeper she went, the harder it would be to come back clean. She folded the check into her journal and turned the first blank page. At the top, in neat block letters, she wrote, Client, Marco DeLuca. Assignment, ghostwriting a monster. Duration, 3 months. Objective, survival. She stared at the words, then underlined the last one twice. Because she had a feeling survival wouldn't be as simple as keeping herself alive. Not in his world. Not with him. Not now. Elena arrived at the penthouse just after noon, her voice recorder and notebook tucked under one arm, her nerves tucked somewhere deeper. The elevator was silent as it climbed, velvet walls swallowing sound until it opened directly into his living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the space in a gray winter light, making the marble floors gleam and the black leather furniture look even more like a movie set. Marco was already there, barefoot, shirt undone, sleeves rolled. For a second, he looked less like a mafia boss and more like a man who had finally stopped pretending he wasn't tired. He didn't greet her with charm or command. Just a nod toward the couch and a glass of lemon water already waiting for her. "Start whenever you're ready," he said, eyes fixed on the skyline like it held something he hadn't yet killed. She sat cautiously, pulled out her recorder, clicked it on. "State your full name, age, and title for the record," she said, because that's how she'd always started interviews, even if this one could cost her life. "Marco DeLuca," he said without hesitation. 40. Owner of DeLuca Imports. Benefactor of 6 charities. Allegedly involved in organized crime. The last part came with a smirk. Elena didn't smile. "Let's start at the beginning." He didn't dodge. "Naples. 1984. I was born in a 4th-floor walk-up with peeling green shutters and one gas burner that only worked if you kicked it." His voice was flat, more memory than performance. "My mother was the only person who ever read me Dante and taught me how to boil pasta in silence, so the neighbors wouldn't hear we had nothing else." Elena stayed quiet, letting him unravel the thread. "She taught me 3 things," he continued. "Art, patience, and how to spot a liar." He glanced at her briefly. "You do this thing with your fingers when you're nervous. Left thumb rubs over right now." Caught, Elena tucked her hand beneath her notebook. "Do you want to talk about your father?" "No," he said. A pause. "Then, he left before I could walk. I don't remember him." Another pause. "Which I'm grateful for. Because I got to have her without him." His voice dipped, almost reverent. Elena had expected anger in his origin story. A bloody childhood. Abandonment turned to revenge. But instead, there was grief. The kind that never hardened fully, just buried itself beneath sharper things. "She was killed when I was 13, he said, and that was the first time his voice cracked. Car bomb. Meant for someone else. Wrong street, wrong morning." His fingers clenched into fists, then relaxed. I held what was left of her scarf in my hands. It smelled like lavender and ash. Elena didn't speak for a long time. The silence stretched between them like a funeral procession. When she finally did, her voice was quiet. "That was the day you changed?" Marco shook his head. "No. That was the day I stopped waiting to be saved." The interview drifted into silence, and Elena turned off the recorder, unsure what to say next. Marco stood and walked toward a closed door she hadn't noticed before. "Come," he said, voice unreadable. "I want to show you something." She followed him, her heartbeat ticking faster as he unlocked the door with a small key and pushed it open. Inside was a studio, spacious, minimalist, and startlingly warm. An easel stood near the window, facing the light. A canvas half-finished showed a woman's face, soft, weathered, beautiful. Elena stopped breathing for a second. "Your mother?" she asked. "The way I remember her," he replied. There were more paintings leaning against the walls, portraits, landscapes, abstract pieces that pulsed with tension and restraint. He picked up a palette knife and idly scraped paint across a corner of the canvas. "No one sees this," he said. "Not even my consigliere. This is the only place I don't have to be the Dawn." Elena's voice was gentle. "Why show me?" "Because you already saw through me at the restaurant," he said simply. "I figured I'd stop pretending you hadn't." She didn't know how to respond to that. So instead, she looked around the room again and let the silence feel like something earned, not awkward. It was the first time she'd seen him look exposed, and it terrified her how human he suddenly was. Later that night, Elena sat on her small couch back in her apartment, replaying the recording. She heard the way his voice dipped when he said lavender and ash, The way he talked about his mother like she was the only god he ever believed in. She pulled out her own recorder, separate from the official one. The one she used to speak to herself, raw, unfiltered, late-night thoughts. She clicked it on and began to whisper. "The dawn bleeds," she said. "And he hides it with diamonds and death. With tailored suits and million-euro cars. But inside that penthouse, behind his empire, there's a boy painting a memory of a woman he couldn't save. And I think that scares me more than any gun ever could." She turned off the tape and stared at her ceiling. Outside, Milan hummed as it always did, motorbikes, laughter, sirens in the distance. She could feel something shifting under her skin. Curiosity curdling into something sharper. Fascination blooming like a bruise. The next few days passed in a blur of interviews and notes. Marco talked more than she expected, about politics, about betrayal, about the thin line between legacy and survival. He quoted philosophers. Talked about Caravaggio like he'd been a mentor. He made espresso himself one afternoon, strong and bitter, and insisted she taste it before continuing the questions. Each visit chipped away at the image she'd built of him. He still commanded rooms like gravity, still had eyes that calculated every exit. But in the quiet between questions, she saw glimpses of a man who'd never been allowed to grieve properly. Who carried his mother's death like a cross, not a scar. And who now watched Elena with something dangerously close to trust. But not everyone was happy she was around. It started small. A black car parked too long across the street from her building. A man in sunglasses who ordered coffee at the cafe but never drank it. At first, Elena convinced herself she was being paranoid. Too many hours with a man whose world was built on suspicion. But then she noticed her mail had been opened, resealed with care, but not enough. Her laptop clicked strangely. And someone had been inside her apartment. She knew it, the same way you know when someone's touched your pillow just enough to unsettle it. Still, she didn't stop. She went back to Marco's. Asked harder questions. Wrote deeper notes. And each night, she recorded her private thoughts in the dark, whispered like confessions. On the 7th night, she came home to find her door slightly ajar. Nothing stolen. Nothing broken. But on her kitchen table sat a single sheet of paper, thick, cream-colored, folded in half. Her name written in red ink on the outside. She opened it with shaking hands. Stop asking questions that get people killed. That night, Elena didn't record anything. She just sat in silence, the threat sitting on the table like a bomb with no wires. Outside, the city didn't know it had started snowing. Inside, Elena understood something else. This wasn't just Marco's story anymore. It was hers, too. What would you do if someone offered you a job that could change your life or end it? Would you take the risk? Drop your answer in the comments, because trust me, you'll want to talk about what happens next. It started with a strange flicker on Elena's laptop screen, barely a glitch, gone in a blink. She was transcribing an interview from earlier that week, Marco's voice low and methodical in her earbuds. But then the file she'd just saved vanished. Not moved. Not renamed. Just gone. Like it had never existed at all. She clicked through her folders, trying to stay calm. The recordings were backed up, she reminded herself. Still, the unease slithered in, coiling tight around her spine. Her antivirus pinged, then blinked out. Then the entire screen turned black, and in white typewriter font, 3 words appeared, "Nice try, writer." She jerked back like the words had bitten her. Her breathing came shallow, uneven. For one stupid second, she thought of Marco's voice saying, "You do this thing with your fingers when you're nervous," and she shoved her hands under her thighs. She restarted the laptop. Nothing. And her gut screamed. Someone had been watching, and now they wanted her to know it. 3 hours later, it was on the internet. Anonymous forums. Dark web dumps. Even Twitter threads. Screenshots of the memoir, her transcripts, circulated faster than a wildfire in dry wind. Paragraphs about Marco's childhood, his mother's murder, his philosophical thoughts on power and violence. Names. Places. Deals. Things no one outside their conversations should have ever had access to. By midnight, half of Milan's underworld had seen them. By morning, 2 rival families had declared Marco weakened. By noon, there was a bounty on his head. 500,000 euros, alive or dead. Elena saw the flyer taped to a lamppost on her walk to the cafe. The panic didn't set in until she reached Marco's penthouse and saw his entire security detail doubled. Men in black standing by the elevator, earpieces in, eyes scanning like wolves. One of them tried to stop her. She didn't slow. "Tell him it's me," she snapped, her voice sharper than she felt. "He'll know." Marco was in the study when she entered, seated at his desk, perfectly still. His eyes lifted to hers like he'd been expecting the storm and was relieved it finally arrived. "You saw it," she said. He nodded once. "It's everywhere." Her throat tightened. "I'm sorry." He stood slowly, like he was conserving energy for a battle he hadn't yet chosen. "It wasn't you," he said. "You wouldn't be that stupid." She flinched. "It was my laptop, hacked," he cut in. "From the outside. Someone got in." He paused. "Someone close." She waited for the rage. The outburst. The cold, clinical dismissal of her as a liability. But it didn't come. Instead, he stepped forward and reached out gently, like she might shatter. "I should have known this would happen," he said, and for once, the weight in his voice wasn't power. It was weariness. Elena shook her head. "It's my fault." "No," Marco said. "It's mine. For thinking I could rewrite the truth without it fighting back." She hated how much she wanted to fall into him, to hide in the very arms of the man whose name now sat under a death price. Instead, she sat on the edge of the desk. "What happens now?" He smiled grimly. "Now, everyone tests the gates." The next few days blurred together like war fog. Elena was moved into Marco's penthouse for her safety, her apartment officially under review. They held the next interviews in the library, doors locked, phones in the hallway, guards posted outside. But the tension between them shifted. Harder. Heavier. And deeper than either of them wanted to admit. One night, after hours of trying to restore her notes, Elena finally confessed the thing she'd kept locked in her chest since they'd met. "My mother doesn't know where I am," she whispered. Marco looked up from his own laptop. "She thinks I'm working on a novel. She doesn't know I'm living in a Mafia boss's penthouse. She doesn't know I'm scared to check her missed calls in case it's the last one." Marco stood and walked over, silent. She looked up at him, eyes glassy. "She's getting worse. Early onset Alzheimer's. She still remembers my name, for now." Her voice cracked. "But I don't know how long I can afford to keep her somewhere safe." He said nothing at first. Then he handed her a bank envelope thick. "Take it," he said. "It'll cover 6 months in full-time care. Private facility. The one in Lake Como." She shook her head. "No, yes," he insisted. "No strings." Her lips trembled. "There are always strings with you." "I'm not doing this as a Don," he said quietly. "I'm doing this as the man you stayed with even after the world started hunting me." That's when she cried. Not loudly. Not beautifully. Just quietly, like someone uncoiling after years of holding themselves too tightly. He didn't touch her. He just stood nearby, like a lighthouse waiting for the storm to finish. When her breathing calmed, she looked up. "Why do you care?" Marco leaned forward, his face closer than it had ever been. "Because you see me," he said. "Not the Empire. Not the blood. Just me." It should have terrified her. Instead, it broke something open. That night, she didn't sleep in the guest room. She stayed up in the library with him, writing, editing, asking questions. And when her head finally dropped against the back of the couch, Marco tucked a blanket over her shoulders and whispered, "You're safer here than anywhere else. As long as I'm breathing." 2 days later came the gala. It was charity-driven cancer research, and Marco insisted on attending to show strength. Elena protested. "You have a bounty on your head," she hissed as he buttoned his jacket. He only smiled. "Exactly. Let them see I'm still standing." The ballroom was gold-drenched and crowded. High society in diamonds and secrets. Elena wore a backless black gown that Marco's assistant had selected, paired with a tiny microphone in her clutch. Marco's hand stayed on her lower back the entire night, not possessive, but protective. The kind of touch that said, "Don't look at her. Don't touch her. She's under my shadow now." People whispered. Some nodded. A few smiled too long. Marco made the rounds with ease: politicians, developers, off-duty officers. Elena stayed close, hyper-aware of every hand that lingered too long, every camera flash that didn't make sense. It happened just past 11 p.m. A waiter brushed too close. Marco stiffened. Elena turned too late. The tray clattered to the floor. The waiter's hand went to his jacket. Marco moved like a weapon drawn from fire. One gunshot cracked through crystal chandeliers. Elena fell to the ground before she even registered the scream. Marco was on top of her, shielding her with his body, shouting orders in clipped Italian. Blood on his sleeve. Not his. Not yet. His men tackled the shooter, a hired freelancer, someone Elena didn't recognize. The music stopped. The lights didn't. Marco pulled her up, hands firm, shaking. "Are you okay?" She nodded, barely. Her heart was racing too fast to lie. "I think so." The shooter had aimed for her. Not Marco. That became clear when they found the note in his pocket. "Take the girl. Break the dawn." Elena read it in the back of the armored car, her hands trembling again. Marco didn't say a word the whole ride back. When they arrived, he pulled her into the study and locked the door. No more events. No more interviews without layers of protection. She nodded. "This isn't just about me anymore, Elena. You're the knife they'll twist if I get soft." Her voice was steady. "Then don't get soft. Get dangerous." He stared at her for a long time, then leaned in. "I already was," he said. "But you made me something worse." "What?" she whispered. He brushed a piece of hair behind her ear. "Mortal." The knife was small, sleek, and cold against her thigh. Elena had never held one before, not seriously, not like this. Marco had handed it to her in silence 2 days after the gala, wrapped in a black leather sheath. "Don't hesitate," he'd said, his voice hollow. "If someone gets close and I'm not there, you use it." She didn't argue. Not anymore. She practiced unsheathing it in the mirror, over and over, until her hands remembered the motion even when her mind couldn't. The weight of it shifted how she walked, how she breathed. She was no longer a writer in hiding, she was something else now. Something halfway between prey and predator. Marco hadn't left the penthouse since the gala. He paced more than he spoke, ran meetings behind closed doors, barked orders in clipped Italian while guards came and went like shadows. He checked every window, every hallway, and Elena saw it, the spiral. Not the dramatic kind, but the slow erosion of control beneath a man trained never to show fear. She caught him staring at her once, just staring, like she was already gone and he was trying to memorize her. "You're bleeding again," she said, pointing to his knuckle. He looked down, noticed the blood, and said nothing. "You can't keep doing this." He blinked once. "Can't I?" The silence between them now was heavy, not peaceful. She tried to work, but every sentence came with static in her ears. Her mother's care was secure, Marco had made sure of that, but the calls were less frequent. Elena couldn't bring herself to tell her mother about the attack. About the fact that the knife taped to her leg had become as familiar as a pen in her hand. One afternoon, she stepped out for air, just 15 minutes. The street market 2 blocks away was busy enough to feel safe. She wore a scarf and sunglasses, kept her head down. But her instincts never fully relaxed anymore. And that day, they saved her life. He came from the side, blending into the crowd, the blade already out. Elena turned at the last second, saw the flash of metal, and reacted before she could think. The knife Marco gave her slid clean through flesh, just below the ribs. The man gasped, shocked she'd fought back. So was she. The crowd screamed. Elena backed away, the blade slick, her breath gone. The man hit the ground, bleeding fast, and someone yelled for police. She ran. Not because she was guilty, but because in that moment, she knew she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. Back at the penthouse, she collapsed on the floor just inside the door. Marco was there in seconds, crouched beside her. "What happened?" She held up the bloodied knife with trembling hands. "I didn't die." His face changed, something between rage and awe. He helped her up, didn't flinch at the blood. "You did what you had to." But later that night, she heard him in the other room, shouting into a phone, furious, panicked. When she entered, he stopped. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "Like I'm broken." Marco turned away. "You're not. You're becoming." The next morning, the penthouse was quiet. Too quiet. Elena wandered through the rooms until she found Luca Veri waiting in the main hall, arms crossed, jaw tight. Marco's underboss, equal parts menace and charm. "You need to leave," Luca said without preamble. "Now." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "You're changing him," Luca said. "You think that's good, but it's not. He's distracted. Softer. Vulnerable. People are watching and they don't like what they see." Elena stood her ground. "If Marco listens to you more than me, why are you here threatening me instead of him?" Luca's smirk was cold. "Because I don't need to convince him. I need to remind you what happens to liabilities." Later that day, Elena couldn't let the warning go. She pulled up the old building security logs, something Marco had given her access to after the leak. It took hours, but eventually, she found it, Luca, entering her building. The day before the leak went live. Her stomach twisted. She stared at the footage, heart thudding in her chest. No reason for him to be there. No known business. No visits. Just him, walking into her building and out again. She knew what that meant. And she knew she couldn't tell Marco. Not yet. She needed more. But the tension in the house was rising like steam in a locked room. Half of Marco's men whispered behind closed doors. Meetings she wasn't allowed to attend became more frequent. When she walked into a room, conversations stopped. Eyes narrowed. Smiles faded. She was no longer just the girl who writes. She was now the woman who might be his weakness. One night, she waited up for him. He came in late, tie undone, eyes haunted. She poured him a drink without speaking. He sat down, said nothing for a long time. Then finally, "They're questioning me." Elena didn't ask who they were. She already knew. "They think I've gone soft," he said. "Because I didn't kill the man at the market. Because I protected you at the gala. Because I'm spending more time painting than punishing." He looked up, raw and exhausted. "Because I let you in." She moved to him, placed the drink down, knelt in front of his chair. "And what do you think?" Marco's hand reached out, trembling slightly, and brushed her hair back. "I think," he said, voice cracking, "you're the only thing keeping me from becoming what they want me to be." He kissed her then, not controlled, not practiced. Just desperate. Real. The world tilted around them. Not violently. Quietly. Like something inevitable. She kissed him back, fingers curled in the lapels of his jacket, not to pull him closer, but to keep herself from floating away. And for one terrifying moment, Elena forgot the blood. The knives. The secrets. She remembered only the man who painted memories of his dead mother, who carried the weight of an empire on his back, and who kissed her like he was terrified she might vanish. But deep in her chest, another truth settled like lead. Someone still wanted her gone. And they weren't finished yet. Have you ever had to become someone you didn't recognize, just to survive? Tell me in the comments, because in the next chapter, Elena starts fighting back, and not everyone makes it out alive. The sky over Rome was cloudless, merciless. The kind of blue that felt staged, too perfect for what was about to happen. Elena stood on the rooftop of the Hotel Vecchio, her heart a metronome of panic beneath the wire taped to her chest. She wore a navy coat, collar turned up, and dark jeans, non-threatening, forgettable. But nothing about her felt forgettable anymore, not after what she was about to do. Luca Veri had chosen the location, claimed he wanted to talk, to clear the air. It was classic Luca, charming a trap into a conversation. Marco hadn't liked it. He'd refused at first, then relented only under one condition. Elena wore a wire, and Marco's men would be within striking distance. She agreed. Because she needed the truth. And because Luca had made it clear he'd talk to her, and only her. The wind whipped harder the higher she climbed. The door to the roof creaked open, and there he was. Luca Veri, tailored coat, polished boots, smile like a knife. "Elena," he said smoothly. "Brave of you." She walked toward him slowly, deliberately, like she wasn't wired, like her heart wasn't threatening to climb out of her throat. "Why here?" she asked. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Luca smiled faintly. Because Rome was where I first learned that loyalty is a performance. And you, he gestured at her. You've turned the whole theater into a tragedy. I didn't leak the memoir, she said calmly. I know, he replied. That was me. The words fell casually from his mouth, like he was ordering coffee. Elena kept her face still. The recorder hummed quietly beneath her coat, blinking red. You sabotaged Marco, she said. Why? Luca stepped closer. Because he forgot who he is. Forgot who we are. You made him forget. And I needed the family to remember. He shrugged. A few leaked files, a bounty or two. He starts bleeding. The vultures start circling. It worked, didn't it? Elena's fingers curled into fists in her pockets. You nearly got him killed. He got soft, Luca hissed. You made him weak. I gave him a war to remind him who he was. You think he should thank you? I think he should fear me again. And then, with that same silky voice, Luca added, but let's not pretend you're innocent in all this. You're the real rot, Elena. You made him care. Her body tensed, the urge to draw the knife on her hip rising. Is that why you sent someone to kill me in the market? Luca's smile faded just a little. Collateral. You weren't supposed to survive. But now that you did, it changes things. Elena swallowed hard. And what do you plan to do about it now? Luca's hand slid into his coat. Too slow. Too deliberate. End it, he said. Clean. Before he could draw, chaos exploded around them. Marco's men came through the stairwell door in tactical black, silent, fast armed. Luca spun, gun half raised, but a shot rang out before he could fire. Elena screamed. Not because Luca fell. Because Marco did. Blood bloomed across his side like ink on parchment. He dropped to one knee, gun slipping from his hand. Luca tried to run, but 3 of Marco's men tackled him to the ground, pinning him with brutal efficiency. Elena bolted toward Marco, collapsing beside him, catching his weight as he sagged. Marco, she breathed. Stay with me. His face was pale, jaw clenched against the pain. Just the side, he said, voice gravel. Not fatal. You're bleeding like hell, she said, voice shaking. We need a doctor now. One of the guards called in the medic. Another cuffed Luca, shoving him toward the door. We have it all, Antonio said, appearing from behind Elena. Confession. Audio. Video. The whole thing. Marco groaned as they lifted him. Good. Then passed out cold in her arms. The drive to the private hospital blurred, sirens, shouting, blood-soaked fabric. Elena sat beside him in the back of the armored vehicle, her hands pressed hard against the wound. Don't you dare die on me, DeLuca, she whispered. You don't get to leave me holding the pieces. Her voice cracked. Not after everything. At the hospital, Marco was rushed into surgery. Elena stayed behind, pacing the sterile waiting room, her hands still stained red. No one asked questions. The staff was paid not to. Antonio sat beside her, silent. Is he going to make it? She asked. He's strong, Antonio said. But even kings can bleed. Elena closed her eyes, pressing her fists to her forehead. Luca confessed to all of it, he continued. The leak. The bounty. The market. All of it was him. He said I was the rot, she murmured. Said I made Marco forget who he was. Antonio looked at her carefully. Maybe you did. But maybe forgetting was the best thing that ever happened to him. She didn't answer. Didn't know how. The doors opened, and a nurse approached. He's stable, she said. But it was close. Elena sat beside him when they finally let her in. His face was pale, a bandage wrapped tight around his side, tubes and wires charting every breath. She reached out and took his hand, cool, heavy, alive. You're not allowed to die, she whispered. Not while I still love you. Marco stirred, lips twitching faintly. You love me? He rasped. Her breath hitched. Don't make me say it twice. He opened one eye. Then I'm definitely not dying. Elena exhaled a laugh, half sob, half relief. Stubborn bastard. His fingers curled weakly around hers. Still bleeding, she asked. He smirked. Not enough to stop me from loving you back. The machine beeped steadily beside him. And for the first time in days, Elena let herself breathe. But outside that hospital room, worse still whispered. And Luca Vieri, though in chains, had already cracked something wide open. The family was splintering. The truth was out, and survival was no longer guaranteed. The bandages came off a week after the rooftop shooting. Marco recovered slowly, each step down the hallway of his penthouse measured and stubborn. He refused a cane, of course, gritting his teeth through the pain like the world might collapse if he appeared weak again. Elena stayed longer than she meant to, sleeping on the couch, tending to his meds, helping Antonio sort through the fallout of Luca's betrayal. But every time Marco looked at her, she could see the questions behind his eyes. Are you still here because you love me, or because I almost died? She didn't answer him, not with words. But at night, when the city dimmed and he couldn't sleep, she sat beside him and read excerpts from their interviews. Sometimes, he'd listen in silence. Sometimes, he'd interrupt with something new, a story, a regret, a memory he hadn't trusted her with before. And one evening, he asked softly, "Will people believe I'm more than what I've done?" Elena stared at the last chapter for a long time before writing the final sentence. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. It was a portrait of a man with blood on his hands and fire in his chest, and someone who had dared to feel love anyway. She didn't send it to a publisher. Not yet. She printed 2 copies and slid one into a manila folder on his desk. When he found it the next morning, she was gone. No note. No goodbye. Just the manuscript, resting on polished oak, and the scent of her shampoo lingering in the hallway. Marco called her name once, then again, louder. The penthouse echoed, but only silence answered back. Elena took the train north. No security. No shadows. Just a single suitcase, her laptop, and the ache of having left behind the one man who had finally let her see the cracks in his empire. She checked into a quiet hotel by the coast and didn't use her real name. Didn't need to. She was done being the woman behind the dawn. The days blurred, sunlight over rooftops, cafes where no one knew her face, mornings filled with writing. She submitted the manuscript under a pseudonym, Rossi Belladonna. A fictional memoir, thinly veiled, artfully disguised. The publisher ate it up in 6 days. The print run was fast-tracked in 6 weeks. When the release came, Elena didn't attend the launch party. But she agreed to one public reading, an intimate gathering at a bookstore in Florence. The flyer read, "An anonymous debut novelist shares the story of a woman who fell in love with a man she wasn't supposed to survive." Seats filled fast. The city leaned in to hear the fiction that wasn't fiction at all. She stood at the podium in a simple black dress, hair tucked behind her ears, heart galloping against her ribs. "This is a story about a monster who bled," she began. "A man built from fire and fear who learned, too late, that love could be louder than violence." Every eye in the room stayed on her. Except for one. In the back row, a man in a charcoal coat sat still, hands folded, face unreadable, no bodyguards. Marco. He didn't move. Didn't interrupt. Just watched her, like the first time he ever saw her across that restaurant floor. Elena's throat tightened. She kept reading. He ruled with silence and iron, until one day a girl cursed at him in Neapolitan and changed everything. A few people chuckled. She smiled through the tremble in her lips. And in the end, she said softly, he didn't choose power. He didn't choose revenge. He left the throne. Her voice cracked, just a little. He left the throne, for me. The applause was warm. Kind. Elena didn't see him stand. She didn't see him move. But when she stepped down from the stage, he was there, close, quiet, real. "You could have called," he said. She looked up. "You could have stopped me." "I didn't want to stop you," he replied. "I wanted to see if you'd come back." She blinked. "I didn't know if you'd let me." Marco exhaled a slow breath. "I let go of everything else." She stepped forward. He didn't flinch. The bookstore buzzed around them, booksellers arranging shelves, patrons asking for signatures. But between them, the noise vanished. "You really left it all?" she asked. "The title, the business, the shadow?" Marco nodded. "Antonio's the new dawn. I'm an advisor now, if they want me." "And if they don't?" Elena asked. He smiled faintly. then I'm just a man who runs a bookstore in Milan. With good espresso and even better company. She didn't cry. Not there. Not yet. But when she leaned into him and felt his arms fold around her, steady and certain, she knew. This wasn't the end. It wasn't the goodbye she'd braced for. It was the beginning of something neither of them had ever believed they deserved. Later that evening, they walked through the quiet streets of Florence, no guards, no threat. Just Marco and Elena. A girl who'd once stabbed a man in a street market. A man who'd once ruled a city from the shadows. Now, just two souls trying to figure out how to live in the light. And in the quiet, Marco said it again. I left the throne. And Elena answered, I know. Because this time, he hadn't done it out of guilt or need. He'd done it for her. Their new life started with early mornings and fresh espresso. Marco traded tailored suits for rolled-up sleeves and cashmere sweaters, and Elena traded her wire recorders for blank notebooks and long, quiet walks. The bookstore cafe opened quietly in a cobbled Milan side street, walls lined with stories both real and imagined. Customers came in for the coffee, stayed for the mystery of the man behind the counter who never talked about his past. Most had no idea they were being served by a former Mafia king and the woman who once nearly died in his world. For a while, it worked. There were no bodyguards. No whispers behind glass. Just books, sunlight, and the sound of her mother's laughter through the phone during morning calls. Elena visited Patricia every Sunday, bringing fresh pastries and reading her chapters from the fictionalized memoir that had become a quiet hit. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel borrowed, it felt earned. But peace is never permanent, not in their world. News came through Marco's old channels. Luca Vieri had escaped. Not from prison, but from one of the friendly, holding houses controlled by allies who were supposed to keep him buried. The leak had come from inside, someone bought, someone bitter. And Luca hadn't just vanished. He'd gone straight to the enemy. The families Marco once kept in check had changed. With him off the throne, power-hungry opportunists had started to swarm. Luca aligned himself with two of them, old bloodlines, dangerous and desperate. Together, they issued a new message: Marco was untouchable. But Elena was not. The bounty hit the dark net first. Then encrypted chats. Then whispers in Milan and Naples, Rome and Florence. €500,000 for Elena Rossi alive. Marco's network went into lockdown. Antonio called just past midnight. You need to disappear, he said. Now. Marco's jaw clenched. We're not running. But Elena already had her code in her hand. If I'm a target, we don't wait. We move. The safe house was 2 hours north, a lake cabin surrounded by trees and silence. Marco hadn't been there in years, but it was still stocked, still guarded. As they pulled into the gravel driveway, snow began to fall in soft, disinterested flakes. How long do we stay here? Elena asked. Marco didn't answer. Inside, the house felt like a memory. Dust and stillness. A fireplace they never lit. Elena walked from room to room, touching picture frames she didn't recognize, his mother's face in one, a younger Marco in another. You used to come here? She asked. He nodded. When I needed to remember I was human. Now they were hiding. Again. But this time, it wasn't Marco who was the hunted, it was her. And that changed everything. Elena stood at the edge of the lake the next morning, breath fogging the air. I don't want to keep running, she said. Marco stood beside her, quiet. I've spent most of my life running, she continued. From bills. From grief. From fear. But not anymore. She turned to him, fierce and sure. If I have to be a queen to survive, then teach me how to rule. Marco looked at her for a long time. Then nodded once. Then we start with how to build an empire without letting it destroy you. Training wasn't glamorous. It was long hours, bruised arms, and lectures on diplomacy, intimidation, and strategy. Marco taught her how to read rooms, how to hear lies before they were spoken, how to disarm a man without ever pulling a weapon. Antonio came up for a weekend, testing her with mock negotiations. She held her own. And when they were done, Marco looked at her like he was seeing the future, not just his, but theirs. But fear never left completely. At night, Elena woke to phantom footsteps. Marco checked the windows, the locks, the woods. She started sleeping with the knife again. This time, it wasn't fear. It was preparation. And then, one afternoon, she stood at her mother's bedside, holding her hand. Patricia was lucid that day, her memory sharper, her eyes more focused. "You look different," she said. Elena smiled. "Stronger." "No," Patricia said. "Heavier. Like you've carried too much." Elena kissed her forehead. "Then I need to get stronger." She sat beside the bed and unzipped her bag. Inside, a folder sealed, marked in case of emergency. "What's that?" Patricia asked. "My insurance," Elena said. "The real story. The whole one. Just in case something happens and no one believes me." Her mother looked at her, proud and afraid. "You've been through something I'll never understand." Elena nodded. "And I'm still going through it." She squeezed Patricia's hand. "But next time someone tries to kill me, I want to be ready." Outside, the snow was falling heavier now. And somewhere in the dark, Luca Vieri was preparing his next move. But Elena Rossi? She wasn't running anymore. She was standing. And this time, she wasn't alone. If the world forced you to become powerful just to survive, would you rise or would you run? Let me know in the comments what you would have done in Elena's place, because in the next chapter, she steps into power and it comes with a price. The rain hadn't let up in days, but it matched Elena's mood, sharp, relentless, cleansing. She stood beneath the overhang of a crumbling hotel rooftop, face to face with Matteo Biaggi, one of Luca Vieri's oldest allies. He was broader than she remembered, his expression more amused than threatened, but she saw the twitch in his jaw when she mentioned Marco's name. "I didn't come here to beg," she said. "I came to give you a choice." Matteo's guards hovered, unsure. But she held her ground, rain slicking her coat and plastering her hair to her cheeks. She held out the envelope slowly, no sudden moves. "These are excerpts from Marco's memoirs," she said. "Unpublished. Real. You know what they contain." Matteo tilted his head. "Go on." "Proof your father worked with the Calabrians during the drug embargo," she said. "Proof he siphoned millions from your own men to pay off regulators and then disappeared before the collapse. It's all here, signed, timestamped, verified. We leak this to the press, and you're not just out of the family. You're exposed to every rival in the country." A long pause followed, tension crackling in the air like lightning waiting to strike. Matteo didn't blink. "And what do you want in return?" Elena stepped closer, her voice cool. "Cut ties with Luca. Publicly. Remove the bounty on my head. Disavow the war before it starts." He narrowed his eyes. "You really think you can walk into this world and start giving ultimatums?" Elena smiled. "I'm not walking in. I've been here. Survived here. And I'm done apologizing for it." They stood in silence, the rain dripping from the brim of Matteo's hat. Then he nodded once. "You've got bigger teeth than I thought." Elena didn't flinch. "You haven't even seen them all yet." The next morning, the leak went live. Controlled. Timed. Strategic. Marco sent portions of the memoir to select journalists, just enough to paint Luca's allies as traitors and cowards. The headlines hit fast: old blood, dirty hands. The untold deals of the very years. A Don's memoir uncovers the lie beneath the throne. The rival family's credibility crumbled like whetstone. Matteo held up his end of the deal, publicly severing all contact with Luca and issuing a cryptic statement that sounded like a threat and a confession wrapped in the same sentence. The bounty on Elena was pulled quietly, but no less urgently. And Marco. Marco watched it all unfold from their apartment above the bookstore, a cup of black coffee in one hand and something close to on his eyes. "You did it," he said, watching her pace. "No," she replied. "We did it. I just lit the match." Marco smiled, setting down his cup. "And now they're choking on the smoke." They weren't hiding anymore. Not fully. The store reopened. The cafe filled. People still whispered, still wondered, but fewer dared to ask questions. Elena worked behind the counter during the day and rewrote her manuscript at night, this time with names. With full truth. Marco read every page. Not as a critic. As a witness. "You're not just telling my story anymore," He said one night, watching her edit. "You're telling yours." She looked up, eyes soft. "I think maybe they were the same story all along. It happened on a Tuesday. No drama. No ring hidden in a dessert or fireworks laced across the sky. Just Marco, standing in the middle of the bookstore at closing, the lights dimmed, the city humming faintly outside. "Elena," he said. She turned, brows raised. "What?" "I want to ask you something." She stepped closer. "If you're about to propose while I'm holding 3 hot coffee cups, I swear," he grinned. "Then put them down." She did. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box, no velvet, no gold. Just a simple white square. Inside, a silver band. Clean. Honest. Uncomplicated. Like them now. "I'm not asking you to join an empire," he said. "There's no kingdom, no crown, no ghosts left to carry. Just me. And you. And a quiet place we can fill with something better." Tears blurred her vision as she laughed. "God, you really are bad at speeches." "I'm not trying to be poetic," he said. "I'm just trying to be yours." She wiped her eyes. "You already are." Then she took the ring, slid it on herself, and whispered, "This isn't the ending." Marco leaned in. "No?" She shook her head. "It's the rewrite." They kissed in the quiet of their bookstore, among the shelves of stories that never knew how close they came to being real. And outside, the city kept breathing. For once, without fear. The wedding was quiet, no limousines, no champagne towers, no string quartet. Just a warm Tuscan breeze, rows of olive trees, and vows whispered under a vine-covered archway behind a crumbling villa. Elena wore a simple silk dress and no veil. Marco stood beside her in a linen suit, the first tie-free moment of his adult life. Antonio served as best man. Her mother, now lucid more days than not, wept quietly through the entire ceremony. There were no reporters. No power plays. Just love, steady and hard-earned. Afterward, they shared slices of lemon cake under fairy lights strung across the trees, laughter echoing through the vineyard. The world didn't end because Marco DeLuca said, "I do." Without an army watching, it started. They returned to Milan hand in hand and reopened the bookstore 2 weeks later. It still smelled like paper and espresso and history. Marco added a children's section. Elena claimed the upstairs office and installed her typewriter like a crown jewel. Customers who knew didn't say a word. Those who didn't simply believed in second chances. Elena's memoir, Burning Quiet, went to print under her real name this time. No pseudonym. No mask. Just truth. It became a bestseller in 3 languages. She signed copies at the counter while Marco made cappuccinos behind her, correcting anyone who dared spell her name wrong. Their daughter, Sophia, was born during a rainy March. All dark hair and big eyes, wrapped in the softness of a life her parents had clawed into existence. Patricia held her and whispered, "You are proof that monsters can change." Elena laughed through tears and replied, "She's proof that monsters never stood a chance." They built a rhythm. School runs. Late-night edits. Marco burned his old ledgers in a fire pit one Sunday morning, watched the ash float away like a ghost finally released. "That life's over," he told Elena. "If it ever tries to come back, we'll remind it who we are now." But the past rarely stays quiet. It started with a letter, no return address, postmarked from Palermo. Inside, a photo of Luca Vieri, taken 2 weeks ago. Alive. In Sicily. Elena stared at it for a long time, then calmly folded it in half and slid it into a drawer. She didn't tell Marco. Not at first. Instead, she called a few contacts of her own, names Marco didn't even know she had memorized. Then she booked a train ticket to Palermo under a name she hadn't used since college. She kissed Marco goodbye and told him she needed inspiration for her next book. He believed her. Palermo smelled like citrus and salt. Elena wore dark sunglasses and kept her shoulders squared. She found Luca easily. He was still arrogant, still loud, still playing Mafia king in a place that had long since tired of such men. But this time, she wasn't afraid. This time, she had leverage. She didn't go near him. She went to the city magistrate instead, with a USB stick and a printed packet of forged identity documents, weapons transfers, and unaudited funds, all traced back to DeLuca. Most of it had been sitting in Marco's archives untouched. The rest? Elena had pieced it together over the past year, quietly, methodically. The magistrate promised discretion. DeLuca was arrested 2 days later during a lunch meeting. No blood. No chase. Just a man dragged into the back of a police van while trying to shout threats that no one listened to anymore. Elena didn't stay to watch. She returned to Milan and slipped the folded photo into Marco's hand. "He's gone," she said. "For good." Marco looked at her, stunned. "How?" Elena smiled. "You taught me how to survive. I just did it my way." He pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. "You didn't have to protect me," he whispered. "I didn't," she said. "I protected us." And in that moment, Marco understood something he never could have predicted. Elena had become more than his equal. She had become his peace. Months passed. Seasons changed. The city kept moving, fast and loud, but the little bookstore on Via Canova stayed soft, sacred. One Saturday morning, Elena walked the aisles slowly, her fingers trailing along the spines of books she loved. Her daughter giggled beside her, chasing dust motes in the morning sun. Outside, Marco unlocked the front door and flipped the closed sign to open. The bell jingled. Life went on. Elena knelt beside Sofia and handed her a storybook. The same one Marco had read to her on their first night in the lake house. The girl who once survived fire now told fairy tales. The man who once ruled shadows now poured steamed milk into mugs with hearts in the foam. She looked up toward the front of the shop, where Marco was laughing with a customer. And she whispered the truth that still stunned her every morning. "The man I once insulted in a restaurant now wakes up beside me every morning, kisses our daughter's forehead, and thanks me for saving his soul." Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.